right, I think we'll kick things off. So, hello and welcome to Inside the Application Literally. My name is Laurel Grodman. I'm Assistant Dean for Admissions here at the Yale School of Management. I am also a member of the Yale SOM class of 2006. So I'm so glad to have you all join me today. I'm going to give a quick warning. We got started a little bit late because my internet is not behaving excellently today. And so I'm going to keep an eye on that. And if for any reason it's just getting in the way of us having a productive session here, we'll make a plan for what to do next. But I hope it will hold for the duration of the next 45 minutes or so that we have together. And again, thanks for joining us. So as the title of the event implies, I am going to open up the Yale SOM application, literally share my screen, and provide a walkthrough of the application live. This is a little bit of a different kind of event from some of our others, like our best application advice that's coming up on the December 13th, or our ACT workshops, which are meant to be a lot more interactive and we'll give you a chance to answer questions about or to ask questions about your individual application. In this event, we're going to dive into some of the more, I guess, ticky-tacky parts of the application that sometimes get overlooked, but are also really important. If we have time, I'll also go through a couple of parts of the process that happen after you hit submit, namely the video questions, behavioral assessment, and the interview. So before I open up the application itself, I want to share a few words just about our philosophy behind the approach to our application and how we evaluate candidates, which I hope will frame our walkthrough in some useful ways. So although sitting down to complete a business school application can really feel like a one-way monologue where you're telling us about yourselves, I really encourage you to think about it more like a dialogue. So the application itself is our part of the dialogue. It's the admissions committee sharing with you what's important to us, what we want to learn about you. And at SOM, we're really thoughtful about our role in this conversation. We've spent a lot of time as a committee identifying what matters to us in assessing candidates. And in turn, what information we need to gather from you within the application in order to make those assessments. And so we put a lot of thought into how the application is constructed. So the questions and the prompts that you'll see within our application is really a result of that. It's our part of the dialogue, and they're what we're hoping to learn about you. And we try to be good communicators. So one of our guiding principles along those lines is that we only ask questions that we believe are really relevant to your candidacy. And hopefully your experience of the application feels a little bit more intentional and streamlined as a result. So with that, I'll note that the committee sees the vast majority of what you submit during the reading process, but not necessarily everything, and not necessarily everything all at once. So anything that we're collecting purely for statistical or reporting purposes, we won't necessarily see as part of an application read. And as we go into the application, I'll point out some other instances of information that we may not see until later in the process, but not necessarily at that initial point of the read. But by and large, what we're asking for, what we're looking at today, will be things that feed directly into our assessment of your candidacy. And as for your role, as within any conversation, it's important to be both a good listener and a good communicator. So I hope I'll be able to, today I'll be able to help with the listening part by giving you a sense of not just what we're asking, but why we're asking for it. And how to best position yourself to share the relevant information about yourself and help us connect the dots. So at the highest level, what we're looking for in the Yale SOM application is really three things. It's your academic potential to make your way through a really rigorous MBA program. We want to make sure that we're setting you up for success. We're looking for evidence of your professional impact, how you operate in professional environments, both as a leader and as a collaborator. And then finally, how you contribute to the communities that you've been a part of, how you operate and interact in the communities and organizations that you've been a part of as an indicator of how we hope you'll operate in the communities that you join here at SOM and then beyond. And so everything that we ask you within the application really contributes to our understanding of one or more of those elements. And I'll try to point that out as we go through the individual sections within the application. And I'll conclude by saying we also believe strongly that bringing in a diverse group of students from a lot of different backgrounds and geographies and interests and experiences is essential to creating the community that lives our mission of educating leaders for business and society here at Yale SOM. And we believe students from an incredibly wide range of backgrounds and circumstances can thrive at SOM. And so to this end, we've built elements of the application that look not just at those three elements that I shared before, but at the environmental factors as one that you've experienced as one aspect of your candidacy. So we care about the distance that you've traveled to get to where you are, to understanding your individual story and what's brought you to this point in your trajectory. So that's where I'll stop with the overview, and we'll actually dive into the application. So if you give me just a moment to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you're able to see what will look familiar if you've opened up a Yale SOM application so far. The instructions page, everyone's favorite part. So I actually do want to pause here for a second to say this past summer, we actually did a very thorough refresh of our instructions throughout the application. We wanted to make sure that you had the information that you needed to, to give both sort of a high level overview of what we're asking you in each section, why we're asking it, how to go about completing it in the most effective way. And so even if you forget most of what I've said today, a lot of it is going to be captured within the application section itself. So that's my plug for reading the directions closely. Again, we did try to be thoughtful in putting them together and giving them what you need there. I'll also point here, there's a link to our MBA application guide, which is another supplement that I encourage you to use as you're thinking about positioning your responses. I also want to note here that if you are applying through our two other application channels, which are the consortium or QuestBridge, our QuestBridge deadline passed for this year, but in case you're looking for a future year, all of the same things that I'm going to say here apply. You'll just see them collected in a slightly different way. So for consortium, you'll respond to the Yale SOM supplement for any information that we ask in our application that isn't directly asked by the consortium. And we review all the inputs in the same way. And so just rest assured that this advice applies no matter how we're collecting the information. So just scrolling down here, one thing that I'll point out, obviously we have our deadlines here. Pay close attention to this post-submission materials deadline. So this is the deadline that you're going to adhere to it for your kind of post-submission elements. So those would be the video questions and the behavioral assessment. So it is a couple of days beyond, but just don't let that window pass you by, because in order to review your application, we really do need all of the elements to be complete. We get asked a lot as well, what if my letters of recommendation are coming in a little bit late? We will give your recommenders a little bit of a grace period, about a week after the application deadline, to get those in. But once again, we really can't begin review of your application until we have everything. So encourage your recommenders where possible to get their letters in by the deadline. The other thing I will point out is our sliding scale application fee. So a little bit of a unique aspect of our process, depending on your annual income, which we'll collect from the work experience section. We have a sliding scale application fee that takes into account individuals who are earning lower income or in parts of the world where the income conversion is not quite as favorable. So again, more information there. But we'll move right into the meat of things. You'll sign a statement of honesty, which I'll have you review on your own as you go through the application experience. But moving on to the personal information. So this is a fairly straightforward biographical, demographical entry section. I don't need to spend too much time here. But I will point out that this is where we will start to collect information about who you are and how you identify. And you'll see, as we get a little bit lower down here, we'll start to gather information for our candidates who are in the military or veterans, optional questions around whether you identify as LGBTQ+. So again, there's elements in here that may or may not start to build kind of a sense of your background and identity. I'll note here, if you are a reapplicant to the Yale School of Management, we'll ask you to identify that here. And if you've reapplied within the last couple of years, this will actually trigger a supplemental essay later on to talk to us about what has been going on since the last time that you applied. The last thing I'll point out here, again, sort of building a sense of your candidacy, we ask if you're applying to a joint degree program at the Yale School of Management. So you'll see here we have quite a few different joint degree programs. I'll emphasize here, these are separate application process. So anytime that you're applying to Yale SOM and one of our partner schools, you will apply separately and be evaluated separately for each of those programs. But it's helpful for us to know, because chances are this somehow fits into your plans and your career aspirations. And so if you in fact select that you are applying jointly, this too will trigger an opportunity to give us a brief statement about how the joint degree fits into your plans. Okay, so from there, we'll really jump into the meat of it. So the next two sections, the academic record and the test score, test scores really work together to give us the foundation of your academic preparation. And we're really looking at the two of those things in tandem. There's no specific weighting to the test scores versus your undergraduate performance. We're looking at all of this together. And in fact, along with the behavioral assessment, which we'll talk about a little bit later today, to understand your academic potential. So the first thing I'm going to note on this section is please read through the instructions carefully. I can say the number one thing that holds up an academic review happens in this section. It's a missing transcript, it's dates that don't line up, it's missing a transcript key for your transcript. So these are, again, the number one thing that's going to stop review of your application in its tracks until we get it clarified. So please do your diligence and read through the instructions carefully on making sure that we have everything that we need so that your application will move through as smoothly as possible. So I'm going to open up, so for each of your undergraduate experiences, you will do for each of your academic experience, whether it's undergraduate or otherwise, you will do an individual entry within here. And so again, you have opportunity to share with us if you've dual majored, you have a minor, pay close attention to how to report your GPA or not report it. So if you are in a program, actually, Yale School of Management is a good example of a school that does not report a GPA on the transcript. If that is in fact the case and your school does not calculate a GPA for you, you're going to want to make sure you click this no GPA reported on transcript and leave this blank so that we know how to sort of appropriately review your GPA from there. I will note, I'm going to make a big plug here. If your transcripts do not include a key to how to interpret your transcript, please include a digital link to a transcript key over here. Every university, by and large, is going to provide this somewhere on their website. I really ask that you do the work for us if possible and pull that information in. Again, by and large, this is information that would be included on a physical transcript. But if you are providing a digital copy of your transcript, which you can, I should point out, we only require an unofficial transcript at the point where you're applying. We'll get an official one later. So sometimes digital versions won't include the sort of way to interpret your individual institution's transcript. So we ask you, please include a link to that right here. So we'll have that readily available. Okay, and so with that, I should point out, I'm talking a lot about the GPA. We look at more than just the GPA within the context of your academic background. We really do dive into every individual transcript. We're looking at the individual grades within there, the trajectory of your grades, the types of courses that you challenged yourself with, the intellectual curiosity that you've demonstrated in the coursework that you've chosen to take. And so all of that information, we'll be directly interpreting from your transcript. The other thing, though, that we ask you to call out a little bit more specifically here is your quantitative exposure. And so we're going to ask you here to report courses that you've taken in these areas: accounting, calculus, finance, microeconomics, and statistics. And I want to underscore that it's not the reason that we do this is not because we need to have this coursework in your repertoire before you've come to the Yale School of Management, but this is a highly quantitative program. We want to make sure that we're setting people up to succeed, and getting a sense of your exposure in these areas will allow us to better identify candidates for what we call our math camp. So this is a short boot camp that happens before SOM orientation that will give you some basic exposure to different quantitative areas. This is a really important input for that process. And then again, just to help us understand your quantitative exposure more generally. So we'll ask you to fill that out. I'll note here, if you are a college senior and are interested in our Silver Scholars program, I should say if you are a college senior, you will automatically be considered for our Silver Scholars program, which I'm not going to go into right here and now, but you can find more information about. You'll just answer a couple of additional questions here. And I really suggest going to the Silver Scholars program page, because by and large, the instructions that I'm giving today apply whether you're a Silver Scholar or direct applicant. But I do want to point out Silver Scholars have a few slight adjustments, including who you'll ask for your letters of recommendation. So again, I highly suggest going to the Silver Scholars program page, and you'll get that additional information there. The last thing I want to point out is something that we never get a chance to talk about in most of our application sessions, but which I alluded to earlier. There's areas of the application and your responses that we don't necessarily see as part of the reading process. This is one of them. So this is answering questions around if you've ever been subject to academic discipline or any sort of felony or misdemeanor in the legal sense. And for people who are answering yes to any of these questions, I know that this can cause a lot of anxiety. And what I want to stress here is that we understand that the situations that you may be sharing with us are complex. And we made the decision a number of years ago to actually pull this portion out of the reading process so that the responses that we've received to these questions were not necessarily going to color the outcome in any particular way, because oftentimes we needed to get follow-up and more information about a particular situation, but it was very hard when we had only limited information within the read. So we actually make our admissions decisions without this information. And then we have a separate committee to make sure we're evaluating the information that we get here consistently. It actually includes partners from other departments within the school who are familiar with academic discipline. And we determine whether we need any follow-up information and whether there's anything here that we need to dig into more. So again, an example of something that we don't see as part of the reading process, but which comes into play a little bit later. And I'll stress, again, for those who may be concerned about having something to share in this section, this isn't a yes or no kind of situation. We really do try to understand the nuance of what happened and sort of proceed accordingly. So with that, I will move into the test score section. So importantly here, these are self-reported scores. You can send us official scores, but you don't need to. These will be self-reported and will verify post-admission. Be really sure that you're just entering for the right test. We're just entering this zone where this GMAT Focus is coming online, and we know for the coming years we're going to have people with both traditional GMAT and now new GMAT Focus scores. So again, you'll have an opportunity when you're entering your test. Just make sure you're selecting the right one so that you'll be able to have the appropriate subscores to put in here. I ask that everyone report all of their scores, not just your highest score. It's actually really helpful for us to understand your testing trajectory. We're always going to consider your top score for purposes of admission, but it's possible that maybe you took a previous test where one of the subsections was higher. That's useful for us to see. It's useful for us to see that you've attempted the test multiple times and if there's been improvement. It also helps with waitlist feedback. So sometimes, we do offer feedback to anyone who's on our waitlist, and it's helpful for us to know if you've already taken the test 5 times. It would be cruel for us to suggest, well, why don't you take the test again? So it's really helpful for us to have that context and information. So again, enter all your scores there. And again, this section and the previous section are what we're using in concert with one another to really get a sense of your academic foundation in thinking about how this fits into the overall evaluation experience. And so with that, I'm going to move into sort of the professional impact area of the application. And we get a sense of your professional impact from a number of different sources. So I'll spend some time first on our work experience section. So again, I'm gonna not dwell on the instructions here, but trust that you'll all spend some time reading there. So the first thing I'll point out here is we get, I think, a sense of your professional timeline and sort of the nature of your professional experiences primarily from two things. Your resume, so we'll ask you to upload a copy of your resume, and you'll see here we offer you the official Yale SOM resume template if you want to use it. There's no advantage to using it or disadvantage to not using it. We just offer it up to you if it's if you're looking for a starting point. So we look at the resume, but we also ask you quite a bit of information within your individual job entries. And I think this is one area where sometimes people will wait to the last minute to fill out this information, like it's just standard fare biographical information. And I actually encourage you to spend a little bit of time with this and make sure you're being thoughtful about your entries here, because we do ask you some things once you kind of dig in. So I'll give you an example maybe of a good entry and a not as good entry. So again, my time working at Citi, asking just some basic information about dates and titles, let's see, make sure you're entering the number of direct reports and indirect reports. And I will clarify here because I think there's sometimes a lot of confusion. Direct report is someone who you manage and supervise. You're responsible for their development. An indirect report is someone who reports to your direct report. So that's the information that we're looking for here. We'll ask you for a brief company description. Maybe less important for a company like Citi that is larger and more well-known. This is really, really helpful if you work for a smaller or lesser known organization to give us a description of your company. And I actually encourage you to replicate that in a brief line on your resume as well for companies that you think the committee may be less familiar with. It helps us place your work in some kind of context. Let's see, brief description of your role. I'm realizing this is actually my example of a poorly constructed one. So here I say marketing and product development rotations. It really doesn't tell much of anything beyond what my resume is going to say. So I would encourage you, I'll show you another example, to be a little bit more thoughtful here in representing what, what was unique about your role, what you were really tasked with doing. And I would say if you've had multiple roles within an organization, focus on the most recent one there. But this is the part that I really want to stress here, sort of the reason for leaving. So this is one of these areas that we absolutely don't get from the resume, but is really helpful in telling your story and connecting the dots. So I really encourage you to go beyond saying, got a new job or got a new opportunity at my next company, which we see a surprising number of. But really use this to tell your story. Why did you leave an organization and join a new one? What was it about that transition that made sense within the context of your story? So I really encourage you to, to take that opportunity. I'll show you by contrast, maybe a slightly better version here is, and we do, we do have word limits here. So it's not about telling a really, really complex, long story, but here within this role at Unilever, here I tried to share, brief description of your role, oversaw all aspects of new product development and long-range brand planning for Bertolli pasta sauces in the US. So a little bit more comprehensive there. And then reason for leaving, I said I wanted to pivot to higher education while keeping a toehold in the consumer products industry. I enjoyed the recruiting aspects of my roles at Unilever and Citi, so transferred to a role in the CDO at SOM, where I could work with students interested in my prior industries. So again, 50 words isn't a whole lot of space, but that's a whole lot of more information than we're getting than simply saying, okay, yeah, I left my role and found a new one. So use that opportunity. The last thing I'll point out here is we will ask if this is a company that you founded or co-founded. So if you in fact are an entrepreneur, there is a whole other set of opportunities to talk about your entrepreneurial business. And I won't go into the specifics here, but we work very closely with Kyle Jensen, who oversees our entrepreneurial program here at Yale SOM. And these questions actually are almost a direct echo of the questions asked in one of his fellowship processes for gaining funding for your entrepreneurial venture. And so links really nicely to the sort of view on entrepreneurship within the school. And these really came from a realization over the years that entrepreneurs in some ways had the steepest hill to climb in sharing their ventures, especially if it were a newer venture or a venture that has since ceased to exist. So we feel that these are an opportunity to really help the committee understand what you did, how you did it, who you did it with, and to give us that kind of information. I'll stress one of the really useful things that we added this year as well is a request that in addition to you attaching your company website, if there is one, pointing us to other public information available about your organization. So if you are an entrepreneur, we are excited to see your responses there. Two other quick things I'll point out within this section. You will need to affirmatively state whether you've had any gaps in work experience of 3 months or more, or if you're currently unemployed. It's not a problem if that is in fact the case, but in sort of the vein of telling us about your entire trajectory and your story and connecting the dots, it's important for us to understand the gaps that you've had in work experience and what you were doing during that time and through what precipitated them. So that's the opportunity to talk about that. The other thing which we ask you to note is, and this relates to the next section, or a section we're going to get to soon, having to do with your work experience, is your choice of recommenders. And so we will ask you to, if you have not been able to obtain a letter of recommendation from one of your current supervisors or your most recent supervisor, if you're not currently employed, we just ask for a brief understanding of why that is the case. Again, very brief. There's lots of reasons why you might not have a current supervisor recommendation. They're not going to negatively impact your candidacy, but it's better for us to understand that than to be left wondering, you know, was this person's current supervisor not willing to vouch for them? So that's an opportunity to do that there. I'll move next into the work experience section is sort of your backwards looking historical information about your work experience. This next section, your post-MBA career interests, is the more forward looking section. We ask you just some very brief questions here about your future or your career interests, I should say. So we say briefly describe your career interests and how you arrived at them. What have you already done to pursue these interests, and what do you need to do going forward? We've given you a very stingy 150 words to answer this, and it's for two reasons. One, we believe you can do it. This is an area where I think being concise is really valuable. But on the other piece of it is we know, and all MBA admissions officers know, that the majority of you will change your mind in some way once you get here. And so rather than hold you to some long drawn out explanation of why it is that you're pursuing your MBA, we really just want to get to the core of what are your interests? How have those interests motivated this journey that you're looking to take? And we know that even if you change your mind or do something, you know, adjacent to the thing that you were interested in now, we're confident that if you've gone through the process of introspection and identifying the interests that are motivating your MBA application, you'll be able to do that again, even if your interests pivot a little while, or a little bit once you get to school. So we ask you to do this in a fairly concise way, and then just identify the industries that best align with your interests. Don't stress too much about this part. In some ways, this helps us better understand where interests lie over time. And we look for trends here. Again, we're not going to hold you to anything that you've committed to here within your application. Point out here, I mentioned earlier, if you are applying to the joint degree, this is where you'll have the opportunity to indicate how that fits into your plans. All right. And so then moving along to recommendations. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this section because there's a lot of other resources out there on how to approach your recommendations and who's going to recommend you. So with that, I'm just going to reaffirm that on that other page is where you're going to want to just confirm if you don't have a current supervisor. I will say it is extremely valuable to have a current supervisor. They're the ones who have the most current information about where you are within your professional journey and are responsible for your direct kind of development and feedback. But again, we understand for a whole host of reasons that's not always possible. So I guess my one tip is in thinking about who might replace the current supervisor, who is most similar to a current supervisor, either in recency, someone who supervised you not that long ago, or in terms of kind of position. So someone who is, again, had direct supervisory responsibility. Okay, so again, I think the work experience, the post-MBA interest, and the recommendations all work in tandem to help us understand that professional impact aspect of your application. And then finally, I'll move on to community involvement. And that's the area where I think we're really pulling from a lot of different aspects of your application. Some of it might come from your resume and the things that you choose to highlight there outside of your professional work. Some of it might come from recommendations, depending on what a recommender, where you source it, and also what in particular they're talking about. This is the other section where we collect some of this information. So we ask you to identify the 2 undergraduate activities and 2 post-undergraduate activities that have been most meaningful to you. And we're asking you to limit it to just 2 because we really do want you to zero in on the things that have been most meaningful to you and to have you prioritize a bit in that way. And so this is giving us a sense of where you have invested, the most of your time and talent. So the thing that I want to emphasize here is think really broadly about the types of activities that you might list here. Some of the more traditional things I think that come to mind are extracurricular activities or sports or volunteer work. But I would go beyond that. I mean, I would think about employment during undergraduate days. That can be a really significant activity and thing that took time during that period. Familial roles and responsibilities. So if you had significant caregiving responsibilities for others within your family, these things can be as significant, if not more, than some more traditional extracurricular activities. So again, I encourage you to think really broadly in how you spent your time and what you devoted yourself to during these periods. Okay. Next, I'm going to move along to the essay, which can actually give us information about any number of aspects of your application, depending on where you choose to go with it. So again, it could be academic, professional, or community involvement, again, depending on the direction you go. But I'll note here, so we have 3 prompts, and I'm going to speak about them collectively because I think in some ways they really get at the same thing. We want you to identify an experience or community or commitment or a challenge that's been really meaningful to you and talk to us about that. So you could go at that through a few different angles, whether it's commitment, community, or challenge. But what we really want you to identify is something that's really important or has been really important within your life and how you've approached that thing. In SOM admissions, we're really big believers that the best predictors of how you'll behave in the future are how you've behaved in the past and how you've learned from and responded to past experiences. And so our application process looks not just for your future aspirations, but for action. And so evidence-based support for how you'll be as a student and alum of Yale SOM. And so these questions are all very grounded in the experiences that you've had to date. So we care not only about the topic that you choose to write about, but how you've approached these things that matter to you deeply. So whatever essay topic that you choose to pursue, you should be specific and detailed about describing that approach to the topic you've chosen. I know there's a lot of stress about the topic itself and how to choose it. My advice here is just don't overthink it. When it comes to when someone asks you, what's most important to you, what matters most to you, what shaped you the most, there's probably 2 or 3 things that come to mind immediately. So go with your gut. Just choose the one of those things that feels like the thing that you can write about most comfortably. Don't worry about being memorable or unique. I get asked a lot, what are some of the most memorable essays that you've reviewed? And of course, there are certain things that stick in my mind, but that doesn't necessarily make it the best essay or the best candidate overall. The best essays are the ones that tell us something authentic about you. And so rather than thinking about how to stand out from others, I'd really focus on the story that you want to tell and the information that you want to give us. One last thing I'll mention here is we get questions about whether it's better to write about something personal or professional. I'd say we're truly agnostic between the two. Again, write about the thing that you're going to be most comfortable and feels most meaningful for you to write about. The one thing I would push you to consider is we do collect a lot of professional information about you, which is not to say we're understanding all of the things that happen behind the bullets on your resume, but we do give you quite a few opportunities to talk about your professional experience. So this might be an opportunity to focus more personally, again, if that feels right for you, but there's no advantage to doing that or not doing that. All right, I want to make sure we stay on track. So I'll touch upon this last section here is background information. And this entire section is optional, so you could answer any amount, all or none or some of it. But this is all information that helps us understand your environment, your context, where you're coming from, the distance you may have traveled, the background and circumstances that led to the, to the successes and the challenges that we've seen throughout your application. And so I'll call out just a couple of particular things here. We'll ask for some information about your parents or primary caregivers that you can identify however makes sense for you. We actually use this information to understand your first generation college graduate status. And so, again, you'll be asked to enter some information about your parents or primary caregivers, information about where you went to high school and where you grew up. If you've experienced time in foster care or homelessness or used federal assistance. Again, all of these questions are optional. And if you feel like there is more to tell about them than a simple checkbox will give you the opportunity to do, I really encourage you to use the supplemental detail information that's down here to tell the story a little bit more fully. Again, optional if it's something you feel important. One thing I'll note here too is we ask you information about whether you've been responsible for providing financial support or caregiving support to others. Again, we really emphasize we know that people spend their time outside of work and school in a variety of different meaningful ways. So we want to give you an opportunity to tell that story here. All right. So with that, I haven't left a whole lot of time to talk about what happens after you hit submit. But I will try to spend a little bit of time now just giving you a flavor of that. So after you've hit submit on your application, after you've paid your application fee, there are two things really that happen afterwards, the video questions and the behavioral assessment. So I'll start quickly with the behavioral assessment. It is an online admissions tool that's administered by ETS, so your friends who administer the GRE if you've taken that exam. And it measures a set of interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies associated with business school success. So unlike a GMAT or a GRE that's looking at sort of cognitive or kind of abilities, this is looking at interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies that, again, we know through our research are associated with success in business school. It is, the test itself is a forced choice module, which sounds maybe more intimidating than it is. What it means is that it'll give you two statements and you'll have to pick the one that feels more like you. And so it might be something like, I like to go to meetings and I'm a very organized person. So whichever one feels more like you, you pick it. You'll go through 130 of these. So you're not meant to spend a lot of time obsessing over your answer to any one of them. You're meant to just move through quickly. I can assure you no one response or even no 20 responses are going to determine your outcome in the admissions process. This is something that we use with a light touch, but I'll tell you how we do use it. So it's not, we don't use it in the sense of we're trying to construct a class with particular personalities or anything like that. It's actually, in the research that we did, allows us to use it in conjunction with your academic information to predict who will do well in the classroom. And more specifically, for candidates who don't have the strongest academic background, either through their undergraduate experience or weaker testing, it actually allows us to take more chances on candidates who we have evidence that that they will perform well once they're in the classroom. And so again, it's used with a relatively light touch within the process, but I like to have the chance to dispel what we are and aren't doing with it. So it's really, again, used as a chance to boost candidates who might be a little less academically strong within the process. I hope you'll actually find it kind of fun to take. I know it's hard to think of approaching any kind of test or assessment as fun, but again, it's low stakes. It's not something that requires preparation, and it is a relatively light aspect of the evaluation process overall. Video questions are the other thing that comes after you hit submit. So we developed these probably coming close to a decade ago, originally to assess English language skills. So it allowed us to drop the TOEFL or the IELTS as an English language requirement. Now we still use it for that, but also more generally to give you a chance to show us how you articulate yourself. Being able to speak spontaneously is an important skill within an MBA classroom and probably in life in general. And so this gives us a little bit of a more sort of textured view into how you present yourself. What the video questions are 3 randomized, previously recorded questions from a member of our admissions team. After you hear each question, you'll have either, depending on the question, 20 or 30 seconds to organize your thoughts, and then 60 or 90 seconds, depending on the question, to deliver a response. My advice here is just become familiar with that response time frame. There was a point in time where I told people to get used to seeing themselves on video. That's laughable now since we all spend all day looking at ourselves on video, but it is useful to think about what a 60 or 90-second block of talking sounds like, because it might surprise you in either direction. So just get used to that. There will be practice questions that you can do before recording your actual responses. I would encourage you, a lot of people like to take notes in that 20 or 30-second window, which is fine. We all kind of process information differently, but I really encourage you to deliver your responses spontaneously. It's not ideal when, someone is kind of reading off of a script to deliver these responses that they just generated. So I promise you the response will come off better no matter what you say if it's delivered more spontaneously. And then lastly, find a good internet connection, which I hope I've managed to have for most of today, and then a quiet, private space. We love to see your cats and your roommates pass the screen behind you. It gives us a thrill, but it's probably going to throw you off your game. So again, try to find a good space where you'll be able to do this. The whole thing shouldn't take more than 20 minutes or so, including kind of the prep and the practice. All right, the last thing I'll mention kind of post-app is we do have an interview by invitation process. So not everyone who applies will be invited to interview. Everyone who we do everyone who we do admit will have been interviewed. Our interviewers are primarily second-year students. So I just say, take this as an opportunity to conduct a little bit of an interview yourself. The idea of having second-year students is largely to give you a connection with a potential peer who has their own experience at Yale SOM, but also can potentially connect you to other people in their network who have an experience that might be valuable to you. So use that as an opportunity to think of some thoughtful questions beyond what you could get from a website or other publicly available information, and really try to think about what can I ask someone who's a member of the community and who has had this experience that could relate to mine as well. All right, I will, I guess maybe the last thing I'll say, which could happen after your application, is updates. So people often ask, well, what happens if something changes after I apply? We want to know about it. So whether it's a new test score or whether it's a promotion at work, or certainly if you've changed jobs or your employment status has changed in any way, definitely let us know. You'll have a form through your application portal to do that. We can't promise that we can incorporate new information depending on where it comes kind of within the space of the round, but we'll certainly do our best. And so be sure to do that just quickly and efficiently after that change comes into place. So I've gone a little bit over. I thank you for those of you who were able to stick around. I hope that information was helpful. But like I said, there are other opportunities to have more individual questions answered. We have a number of application workshops coming up in the next weeks, or the next couple of weeks. Bruce Delmonico, who I co-lead the office with, and I will be doing our best application advice event on December 13th. We'll go into a little bit more detail about how we approach those things that we assess: your academic potential, your professional impact, and your community involvement. I encourage you to take advantage again of the MBA application guide that we have online. And certainly, if you have any individual questions that aren't answered through any of these platforms, you can always be in contact with us through mba.admissions@yale.edu. So we look forward to hopefully getting a chance to review many of your applications after our round 2 deadline in early January, or our round 3 deadline in April. And so best of luck, and I hope you found this helpful and find the entire experience of applying to the LSOM to be a good opportunity for introspection and reflection. And we're really looking forward to getting to learn more about you through that process as well. So thank you, everyone, and best of luck.